2 weeks ago, someone asked me about, I don't know if it was 2 weeks ago, but someone asked me about open source, how they can begin contributing to open source, and they are not heard about this event that is happening today. And basically what I want to mention is that we have so many people who have been part of, the open source, trying to get into the open source business, trying to, see how they can contribute. And it's very interesting that today we have this chapter opening, and people have been asking, okay, if I have to contribute to open source, how do I stand to gain from this? There was a time I was in the US, and I found some Indian who basically asked me where I was coming from. He had never heard about Uganda, but he got to know about Uganda from a lady who happened to be my classmate, and is called Joanna. And how she got to know her was because she was contributing to open source. At the moment, the lady is now she's now based in, I think she's based in Canada at the moment, working from Canada. And all that journey started from open source contribution. And of course, when you get there, someone is going to be like, okay, I go and do something. It's free kind of stuff. How am I going to benefit? But the connections. So I'm very excited that the Innovation Village is partnering with this chapter, O.S.C.A, Kampala chapter. I'm very excited because I really know there's a lot that is going to come out of this, and definitely we have seen so many things come out of communities, and consistently being part of this is definitely going to take us somewhere, I promise. Those of us who are joining us today. I must also mention that, okay, when you look at the number of people who are so far in the call, that's quite a small number. But looking at the interest, we had over 100 people, probably close to 120, showing interest in this, and that's a good sign. Some people may be caught up at the moment, but there is interest in this, and we cannot talk of interest when they do not understand what this is about. We have so much to benefit from this community, and I'm very excited to see what comes out of this. And the future is bright. That's what I can mention. I will be jumping off this call. I'll be here for a while, but at some point I'll just jump off the call. So I want to over to you, Abraham, and I want to say thank you very much for starting this conversation. I will just ask that while you continue, make a good introduction of yourself, which you did not start with. Make a good introduction of yourself and the speaker as well. Usually we are very excited to meet people who are trying to support our communities, and we know that we can have go-to people to continue supporting this community. And I will definitely pledge my support to making sure that we do great things around this community and assisting where necessary. So thank you very much. Over to you, and I want to welcome everyone once again. So thank you. Over to you, Abraham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solomon. And I would like to welcome everyone to this launch of the Open Source Community of Africa, the Kampala chapter. The Kampala chapter is the first open source community that is happening in Uganda, and this has been happening in the rest of the cities around Africa. Basically, it started in Nigeria, and they decided to create a community of all people who are interested in open source, and they span into different chapters. There's one in Abuja, one in Lagos. They created also others in different cities. So there's one in Nairobi, one in Johannesburg, and this is a chapter of Kampala. It's driven mainly by the cities and mainly interested in people who want to contribute to open source, and people want to learn about what the opportunities are in the open source community. There is a lot that, as you're going to hear from our speaker, um, the speaker will introduce herself. She's called Anyudewara, and my name is Kakoza Abraham, and I'm the Kampala chapter lead for the O.S.C.A. You can just say it's O.S.C.A, Open Source Community Africa, the Kampala chapter lead. And on that note, I would like to introduce our guest speaker so that we can kickstart and learn what we can benefit from being part of the open source community. Thank you.
Hi. Hi everyone. I hope you can see me. I have a beach in my background, so yeah, this goes to show you that open source is the kind of business that you don't have to travel to a place of work or anything like that. You can work from anywhere, literally. So today I've chosen to work from the beach, as you can see in my background. So to kind of kickstart this presentation, I'm going to introduce myself, and then we shall just get into it. Allow me to share my screen just briefly. So it's good to be here today. My name is Anyu Deborah Oduman. I am a computer engineer. I am also a web developer and an open source contributor. I am also the co-lead for the Open Source Community of Africa Kampala chapter. This community, as Jerry has detailed, is fairly new. We might be the most recent chapter that has opened out of all the other African Open Source Community Africa chapters. This goes to show you the level of awareness about open source in the country. So these chapters have existed for a very long time, like some of them since 2012, since 2015, and ours has just cropped up in 2020, but it's never too late. We're going to hop onto this train of open source. I'm going to show you all the opportunities that you can get out of open source technology and how you can benefit from it. So the theme for today is Open Source Community Africa, open source in Kampala. So we're going to, not Kampala the city per se, we're going to focus on the whole Uganda because there are very many developers in various districts, in Soroti, in Masaka. So when I say Kampala, I really mean Uganda. So the sub-theme for today's presentation will be exploring opportunities in open source. So just this is what we are going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about my open source story, just to kind of give you an overview of what I went through in the field of open source. I'm going to explain what I understand by free and open source software in my experience, and then we shall go into
recording in progress.
We shall go into some of the examples of open source software and open source organizations, why you should contribute to open source software, where to start, how you as an individual can benefit as an open source contributor. We shall go into all the opportunities that you can pursue through open source, some of the communities that you can join as a starter, some of the important resources that you might need as you start diving into the community of open source, And then I'll just leave some links to some of the channels through which you can reach me in case you have questions and concerns or queries about today's session. So let us start. So like I had introduced myself earlier, my name is Annie Deborah. I'm the O.S.C.A co-lead. I'm also a computer engineer. I'm a self-taught web developer. My stack is MongoDB, Express, React, and Node. Though it's easy to get caught into the trap of trying to learn every technology, but that's my main stack. If anybody asks me what's your language, I'll just tell them JavaScript, even though I have had some experience with Python and stuff like that. So when we talk about open source, I have contributed to some of the free and open source software communities such as Mix, Tor, Curious Learning, and majorly those three. So other titles you might find on my social media channels, you'll find consultant, social media manager, secretary, but that is not very important when you're talking about open source. So just to kind of explain how I got into this field of open source technology and open source communities. I can't explain that without really explaining how I got into the field of technology. So since I do computer engineering, I was exposed to opportunities such as the ones that Andela had when they were still here in the country. So they had programs such as the Andela Women's Initiative, whereby they were teaching people how to program. They also had a couple of other boot camps that taught university students and people who are enthusiastic about web development. So I took those opportunities, and that's how I came to know about so many things in web development and about open source. I also have a background in writing. As I'll explain later, most of my contribution in open source technology has been through technical writing, more of technical writing than coding. Though the presentation that you're going to have today is going to be very invaluable to you, even though I have contributed mostly in technical writing. What we're going to look at today is going to cut across all fields that you might choose in the world of open source. So just to talk about my open source story, I started working in open source in lockdown of 2020. The lockdown came, schools were closed, we didn't know what else to do. So since we always use social media, a friend of mine tagged me and said, there's this program called Outreachy, this blue logo that you see here. I think we should apply. It looks really interesting. So this is the tweet, So this guy was like, oh, let's apply. I was like, oh, cool. Here there's Kawaka. I was like, okay, fine. So, sometimes you just tweet things and you'll be like, okay. So, but then I casually looked into it. I looked at their website. And then I found out that Outreach is actually a diversity initiative that provides paid remote internships to people who are subject to systematic bias and are impacted by underrepresentation in the technical industry in which they are living. So this means that me coming from a country like Uganda, first of all, we already know that Uganda is a third world country. And the challenges that come with being a third world country. So a story like mine, and in addition to the representation of women in the open source community and in the technology sector, for example, in my class, we were like a ratio of like 1 to 3, 1 being girls and 3 being boys. So there's still a lot to be left there's a lot to be achieved in terms of representation of all minorities in the world of technology. So this is what Outreach does. It gives you an opportunity to contribute to the world of open source, and they pay you for it. They pay you $6,000 as an internship stipend. Can you imagine? And then it's also remote. So you work in the comfort of your bed or wherever, and nobody's going to monitor you, try to see what are you doing at this time. Everything is self-managed. You manage yourself. You just have to be very disciplined. And this internship takes 3 months. So the cohort that I was in lasted from December of 2020 to March of 2021. So that was kind of my induction into the world of open source. So the organization that I applied to, so Outreach is kind of an umbrella organization that when they launch, they ask organizations to apply, organizations that want open source contributors. So some of these organizations can be Mix, like this logo that I have here. Mix is a DJ software. The various communities apply Mix, Tor, that is the Onion Router, O.S.C.A, NORM. There are so many organizations that apply. So you as an intern, as an open source contributor, you have the choice to choose which organization that you want to contribute to. So when I looked at the list of organizations that they had on the website, and the requirements, and kind of deciding which community would I make the most impact in, I came across Mix. So Mix, just briefly, Mix is a free open source DJ performance software that is hosted on Windows, Mac, and Linux. There are not very many DJ software that can work for all platforms, but Mix is one of them. So that was my first opportunity into open source. And then my second opportunity has been in Google Season of Docs, which I'm still currently in. I actually just started just the beginning of this month, I think. So Google Season of Docs is a program that provides support for open source projects to improve their documentation and to give professional technical writers an opportunity to gain experience in open source. So I had mentioned earlier that I had a background in technical writing, actually just writing in general. I think once you know how to write and you have had experience writing books or novels or articles in your life before, you can do technical writing, especially if you are in the technology sector. So just like Outreach, they had a couple of organizations that applied. They needed technical writers to join and contribute to the documentation. And among these organizations, this Curious Learning was one of them. So Curious Learning is an organization that works with various partners to curate and localize and distribute and measure free and open source apps for young children. So you'll find there are some applications that you'll find on Google Play that teach kids how to read, like A, B, C. This is a dog, these are clouds. So that is what Curious Learning does. It's an open source community because their platform is very technical. They use technologies such as JavaScript to kind of produce those stories. And on the user front end, what the kid sees is kind of cartoons and pictures and stuff like that. It sounds very interesting. So that was my second opportunity in the world of open source. And I'm still currently enrolled in the Google Season of Docs program. And this program is going to end in September for my organization. So that is my open source story. I hope I didn't over talk about it. So let us demystify open source. What really is open source? So free and open source software is software that has source code that anyone can inspect, modify, and enhance. So this source code is made publicly available for very many people out there in the world to code, to copy, to learn from, alter, and share. Usually when people make software, they do not want to leave it public for anybody to modify, because what if somebody makes errors in your code and kind of crashes your entire project? That would put to waste hours and years of work that you've invested. But this is not a worry in the world of open source, because there are kind of rules and regulations and a system that kind of helps to keep that in check. So here in Uganda, there are not a lot of platforms promoting the agenda of open source, as Mr. Solomon had said earlier. Why? We are not very sure, but maybe it's because of the level of awareness. So it's actually, I'm excited to be sharing this presentation with you to kind of share about the various opportunities that you can get in open source. So there's a lot of mystery about open source software, and we're going to just debunk that. So open source software is freely licensed to use, copy, study, and change in any way that you want. The source code is openly shared so that people are encouraged to voluntarily improve the design of the software and even the functionality. So this is different from proprietary software. So proprietary software is not free, while free and open source software, okay, they might not be free per se in terms of money. When they say free, it means you have the freedom to do what you want with it. Kind of free, like as in, like it's like freedom of speech. You have the right to do with it as you please. So that's what they mean by free and open source software. So it doesn't necessarily mean free in terms of money, because you can find free and open source software that has paid features, but it's still considered free and open source software. Yeah, so that is a brief about open source software. We're going to look at more detail about this in the next slides. So when we talk about, it's hard to ignore the topic of open source organizations when you talk about open source software. So open source organizations, these are, oh, I forgot to talk about the examples of free and open source software. Sorry about that. So examples, these are some of the most commonly used technologies that you use in your day-to-day lives. Some of them include Python, Visual Studio Code, Moja Global. This is a climate change initiative. Even Mozilla Firefox, the very browser that you use, is open source. People contribute to it voluntarily, and it's made publicly available for everyone to alter as they wish. The Onion router, which is also a browser, OpenStack, as I was talking about earlier, Mix, which is a DJ performance software, is also open source. So there are very many examples, but these are just a few examples of open source software. So the organizations, the open source organizations are those that are devoted to advocating for open source software. There is advocacy, there's legal aid, there's financial aid, technical aid, governance, among very many other things. So for projects that have their own foundation or are part of an umbrella organization, their primary goal is often to provide a mechanism for funding the development of the software. So I'll just give you one example. When I was in outreach, there was an organization that was kind of handling us called Software Freedom Conservancy, that kind of handled the payments. Like I had mentioned earlier, that we were given a stipend of $6,000. So the organization that I was working for, Mix, was not paying me. It was actually those payments came through Software Freedom Conservancy. So as when I say that these organizations kind of advocate for funding, they try to raise funds for the development of open source software to support people who are trying to get into the world of open source. This is what I mean. Like in my very example, they were paying us $6,000 to contribute to open source software. So these organizations are mostly structured as non-profit or non-charity because they do not exist to make profit or to try to get money off free and open source software. No, they're just trying to promote the agenda of open source software and the various benefits of contributing to it. So they are non-profit and they're mostly charity organizations. So when you talk about open source organizations, these do not include organizations that are actually out there to make money off software. No, because open source organizations, their main agenda is to just encourage the development of open source communities and software. So just examples of open source organizations and or foundations, there is Mozilla, I had talked about earlier, Software Freedom Conservancy, the Linux Foundation, Red Hat, the GNOME Foundation. This logo that you see here with CC is called Creative Commons. Some people might be familiar with it. If you're working with graphics or video creation, and you're going to post that video on YouTube, you can't use music downloaded from popular artists because you need a license for that. That would be violation of copyright laws. So Creative Commons kind of gives you resources that you can use for creation of these videos. So they give you free music. Okay, mostly I know about free music. I don't know what else that they give that is free, but I've used their free music before. Then there is also the Python Software Foundation. I think Python as a language also falls under this. The Open Source Initiative, O.S.C.A. This is a open source organization that has a very large community in Asia, in Asian countries. Even Mozilla, then Libre, which is right here, Libre Space Foundation. There are very many organizations. These are just a few. So I guess you might be asking, why would I build a software and make it open source? Why would I give it out there for anybody to just modify however they wish, however they want? There are very many reasons actually which are very justifiable. So we're going to look at some of the reasons why some communities might choose to go public, or as you might know it, like to go open source compared to proprietary software. What are they aiming to achieve? So if we're going to look at cost. So because open source software is free to use, distribute, and modify, it has lower costs, and in most cases, this is only a fraction of the cost of the proprietary counterparts. You realize that when you make proprietary software and you close it in, and it's limited to only a few people to develop, and if you're trying to build the software and you want it to grow and have very good features, you're going to have to hire experienced developers, graphic designers, illustrators, and all that stuff, and all that takes money because you're going to have to pay people to come and contribute to this software. But why should you pay people if you can just make it open source and have people who love your software contribute to it free of charge? So that's one of the reasons why communities might choose to go open source. Another reason is collaboration and sharing. So open source software it has this way of bringing people together to collaborate and work at the same goal. So if you've been in a project where you have very many people working on the same thing, you realize you get a lot done, and you end up making very great connections, and you learn a lot from everyone who is collaborating with you. So that's also another advantage of going open source. So another advantage is control and customization. So many people prefer open source software because they have more control over the way it works. They can examine the code to make sure it's not doing anything they don't want it to do. They also have the freedom to change parts of it that they do not like. So users who aren't programmers can also benefit from this because they use the software for any purpose that they wish, not merely the way someone thinks you should use the software. So you can download the software and you'll be like, I don't want this feature. I'm going to make it do what I want. So that's the advantage of open source. Anybody can customize it. It's really free. Like, you can do with it. Like I said, there's freedom in open source software. So training developers into better programmers. So other people like open source software because it helps them become better programmers. Because open source code is publicly accessible. For us who are like computer science students, computer engineering students, we might want to work on a real life project like Google or VS Code or something. Like, we want to get involved in a really huge project. With open source is an opportunity to do that because nobody is going to limit you. You're not going to have to apply. You're not going to have to write application letters or send your CV or anything like that. It's really free. Just go to GitHub, download the source code, experiment with it, do with it as you please, and see what you can, It's just free. And in all of that, it trains you to be a better programmer, because you're working on a real life software. And at the end of the day, if you feel like you've made a very great contribution, you can push your code to GitHub. And once the community looks at your code and they're like, wow, this is a great feature, this what you've done is amazing, they'll integrate your changes into the main repository. So at the end of the day, you've made a huge contribution to the open source community. Who wouldn't want that? So let's talk about security. So open source software, much as it is mind-boggling and it may be hard to believe, it's actually more secure and stable than proprietary software. Why? Because anyone can view and modify the open source software, and someone might spot, sometimes you can use a software and you find this feature doesn't work right. And that means there is a bug in the software. There's probably an error. So if the software is closed and proprietary, you don't really have the option to make changes to the software and kind of correct the error. But with open source, you have the freedom to correct the error and make a contribution by correcting the errors in the code and making it better. So in essence, that makes the program more secure, compared to proprietors. Sometimes with proprietary software, there are pro developers involved, but sometimes they might not know anything, and sometimes they might miss some small bugs. But if it's open source, even the small bugs are taken care of by the community, as long as it's open source. So they can make fixes, they can update, they can upgrade the software. So the community is really growing, and the software is actually becoming better and better by the day, because there are very many people who are involved and they're doing it free of charge. So let's talk about stability. So sometimes when you're involved in a project and there are a couple of developers involved, let's say like 50, along the way the developers say, they got better opportunities, they leave the program and they go and, chase other opportunities. So this kind of leaves the software, they leave it in jeopardy because there's nobody else to take care of what they have been taking care of. There's nobody to kind of add on to what they have been doing. So when I talk about stability, we're talking about how can somebody just leave the software just like that and just go and, do chase other opportunities, which is okay. But if it's closed and proprietary, it kind of leaves it at a disadvantage. So programmers can be sure that their tools won't disappear or fall into disrepair if the original creators of that software stop working on them. Because if the original creators leave, other people in the community can take over and continue the work in developing that software. So it makes it really stable. Whether community members leave or, chase other opportunities, there will always be people to continue the work that you have been doing, and that's an advantage of open source. So let's talk about community, and I'll explain more in detail as we go on. Some communities might choose to go open source so that they can grow the community. So when I talk about community, I'm not talking about a fan base, like people who love the software and they just want to buy in emotionally or financially to one elite group. No. But when I talk about community, I'm talking about the people who produce, the people who test, the people who use the software to promote, and then they also promote the software, and they ultimately affect the software that they love. So you find that in a community, there are various people who are contributing to the software, like illustrators, voice artists, authors, documentation authors, programmers themselves, people who test, people who donate. There are so many members who are part of the community. And if you make a research on some of the popular open source software communities out there, you'll find communities like VS Code, Microsoft, and you'll find that they have a large community full of people doing all kinds of things. And of course, with very many people contributing to the software, all these added advantages come on security, stability, etc. Yeah. So that said, how can you contribute to open source software? So you don't have to be a programmer to contribute to open source software. Open source technology and open source thinking both benefit programmers and non-programmers. So your role your role in the community can range from graphic design and art. Sometimes communities need illustrators, people who can do graphics. You would essentially be contributing to open source software. No, but you don't have to contribute code. You can contribute in all these ways. You can do documentation writing, just like I do. I do writing a lot, so most of my work in open source has been in technical writing, which is documentation writing. So I did that with Mix, and currently doing that with Curious Learning. So if you're a writer out there, just keep on honing your skill. You'll be better at it, and you'll eventually start contributing to open source. And then you can also contribute by testing the software. Sometimes you don't really have to do much. Sometimes they just want other people out there to kind of test the software and see if it works right. So your role in this open source community would be testing. Yeah. So if you find that there's a problem with the software, you just report that back to the core developers, like there's a bug here, and you don't have to fix that bug yourself. If you can go ahead and fix it, but if you're a tester, you will just be reporting like, oh, this works and this doesn't work. So you would still be contributing to open source software. You can also do localization. Localization, I mean translation. You will find there are some documentation of various open source software that are written in English, Spanish, Kiswahili, and various languages. So if you're somebody who is good at Luganda, because you're in Uganda, if you're good at Luganda, you can be like, oh, I want to translate this app or manual into Luganda. You can contribute to open source software in that way. You can also file bug reports. You'd also be contributing because you're making it better. You're reporting a problem in the software, and once that is taken note of, this would the core developers will then take the next steps to kind of eliminate that bug and improve the software. You can also contribute by donating. Usually if you go to some open source repositories, you'll find a donate button at the top. It says donate or sponsor or something like that. So you might not code or do anything major, but you can contribute some money, because much as software is free, they also need funds. They need funds to kind of go on. They need to pay some people, they need to parent. Money is important, even if it's free and open source software. You can also contribute as a data scientist. My image is kind of blocking. You can contribute as a data scientist and as a project marketer. You can just market the project out there on your social media. If you have a blog, you can talk about the software and the various things that it can achieve. So they're really this is not even the full list. There are so many ways you can contribute to open source software. So now that you've seen how you can contribute, where do you start? So when guys go out there, they just go on Google how to start contributing to open source software, and Google returns so many results, and then you start getting overwhelmed, like maybe this is not cut out for me, like maybe this is just not for me, and then you begin to have doubts, like maybe this is like for pro guys or something like that. Like that's not true. So let's take it step by step. I'm going to show you how, like where to start and how to start. So one of the important things to take note of as you start contributing to open source software is self-awareness. First of all, you need to know, what are you interested in? What are your talents? Are you good at graphic design? I had shown you the various roles of the open source, the people in open source communities. You can be a graphic illustrator, you can be a voice artist, you can be an author, you can be a programmer. What are you good at? Are you good at writing? Are you good at programming? Identifying that would be one step forward to knowing how you can contribute to an open source community. So what programming languages are you good at? Are you good at JavaScript? Then you can go ahead and look for a JavaScript project. Are you good at Python? Then you can go ahead and look at a Python project. Then let's talk about skill requirements. So once now you know what you're good at, and then you come across a project, sorry, you're going to have to look at what they require in that project. So for in my example, when I was contributing to Mix, they need people who are good at UI and UX, people who are good at Adobe Illustrator, people who are C++ developers, what else, technical writers like myself. So they usually in like the GitHub readmes, which I'll show you next, they'll list a number of skills that they need for this project. So if you feel that your skills fit that criteria, you can go ahead and kind of look at other details and start contributing to that software. But you have to make sure that the skills that they require fit your profile, or at least remotely. So it's also important to fit into the community. I think this is important because when I was applying to some of these programs, like I had said earlier, O.S.C.A and Google Season of Docs, it was important to find a community that you feel happy about. Sometimes people contribute to software, but they don't really like the community, and that is a major hindrance, because if you run into a problem, how are you going to approach somebody in the community to ask, oh, please help me out with this, So you need to find a community that is like you find friendly, nice, you feel free with, you can ask any question. So I think this aspect of community is very important. So sometimes you might like the software and you might want to contribute to it, but maybe the community is lacking, So then you can go ahead and find a community that you really fit into and a project that you can be excited about. So another important thing is to get to know GitHub. I can't even emphasize this enough. Before entering the world of open source, I was actually into I was using GitHub for a very long time. Like I said earlier, in my university days, I was like going to Andela, and if you've been to the Andela boot camps, GitHub is a requirement. You have to learn Git, come rain or sunshine. So I thought I learned Git, like I knew everything, like Git pull, Git clone, like all that. But then once I joined the world of open source, I was like, whoa, like I was actually overwhelmed. And I didn't know there was much more to Git than just Git pull, Git push, and all that. So you don't have to learn Git fast, then start contributing. You can learn Git along the way, just like I did. But the skill of version control is a very important aspect, because, like I said earlier, you can't just download the source code from a project repository and begin doing it as you like, and then just, push, and then it will just get merged. No. Git helps with version control, because the community leaders need to control the kind of changes the community members are making to the code. So to do that, they have to use Git. So you have to be very good with Git. So I just attached here an example of an article that I had written back in my day, when I was contributing to Mix. They were like, write about a major struggle that you had when you were contributing to, when you're working with the community. And for me, I had a couple of other struggles, but I felt like this was my major struggle. Like I thought I knew Git until I began contributing. So when I say please learn your Git and your GitHub, it's actually very important. So how to start? Now that you know where to start, how do you start? So once you've identified a project that you think you might want to contribute to, go ahead and understand the project's goal. What are they trying to achieve? What are their objectives? What are the objectives of this project? You have to be able to believe in the project. For example, if you're contributing to Moja Global is an open source community that aims at effecting climate change. So some of you might be very passionate about the environment and green and, kind of stopping global warming or controlling it. This might be the right project for you because you're passionate about effecting changing the environment. So you have to understand the project's goals and objectives and kind of buy into it. It has to be personal to you as well. I think so. Because it doesn't make sense to contribute to something that you don't really have passion for. So my community, Curious Learning, the community works with at making stories, interactive stories for young children to kind of help with early learning and development. And I have kids in my family, and it's lockdown times are hard, schools are closed. How are they going to learn? So if we have resources like tablets and phones, why don't we just give the kids a tablet or a phone to learn from? And this is what Curious Learning does. So I really felt like I was very passionate about their goal of kind of promoting early learning and development. So I think that is the point of understanding the project's goals and objectives is very important for me. You have to at least be passionate about what you're doing. So once you understand that, you can now start to ask yourself, how do you fit into that picture? So somebody's microphone is on. Okay, so after that, you can then start acquainting yourself with a project. What role can you play? I had shown you earlier the various roles you can play. You can be an illustrator, you can be a UI UX designer, etc. So you can ask yourself, what role can I play in this project? So once you get that, now you can go ahead and read and understand the contribution guidelines of that project. What do they need? How do you start? What are the procedures and stuff like that? So once you've understood that, you can go ahead and, if the project is hosted on GitHub, like now for Mix, they had they had the source code. They have a download button on their website whereby you can download the software and you can run it and see how it works. I had worked with for us who have been in boarding schools, I had worked with there's this DJ software that all schools were using. I think it's called I've forgotten the name, but it has a red logo. So when I came across Mix, I was like, oh, this is almost the same thing as that software that we are using. So I downloaded the software, I demoed it. I was like, I kind of began comparing it to the one that I was using. I was like, oh, these features are very similar to, I'm kind of very familiar with this software. So I think that helped. So once you understand how the software works, you can understand better what code you need to write and how you can contribute to it. For me, I feel like that's very important. So download the project, demo it, and understand it. You can't contribute to software you don't understand. You can't begin contributing to Norm or Opia if you don't know how they work. It doesn't make sense. So let's then, after you've finished that, community is very important because all these open source softwares have community attached to them. So you need to join the community, kind of meet other members, get to know who the core leaders of this community are, who are the developers, what roles do each of these guys play. You have to kind of understand what channels you need to communicate. Communities have guidelines because it's easy to violate somebody's rights when we talk about community. It's easy to say something that rubs somebody the wrong way. So you need to understand how to conduct yourself in the community. What language are you using? How are you addressing people's pronouns? Are you addressing somebody by a how when it's a they? All those things are important, So you need to understand the community and the relevant channels that you're going to use to communicate to the community. So just to kind of give you an example, I was talking about contribution guidelines when you're acquainting yourself. Usually these contribution guidelines might be in a README here, readme.md or contributing.md. So you have to look out, when you reach the projects page, look out for some documentation that looks like this, that kind of teaches you like a quick start, like how do you get started, where to download, what technologies do you need to know, what tools do you need to use, what do you need to install, contribution guidelines. This is all very important. So usually for a very technical community such as VS Code or Microsoft or Mix, most of these guidelines are in a README or a contributing.md. As we see here, this is all taken from, I took these screenshots from GitHub. So once you've gotten yourself acquainted with the community and with the code, and if you're a first timer, just like I was when I was with Atrici, you're going to have to you might want to start with beginner friendly issues. Issues are problems that are opened by the community, like, oh, the community can decide we need to work on this feature or we need to work on this bug. That's an issue. So if you go to GitHub, I think most of you are familiar with this. There are issues on GitHub whereby, once you open the issue, you can start working on something. So usually they have labels. I'm going to show you here. If you look at this slide, it has this green label that says good first issue. Somebody's microphone is on. Okay. So there is this label which is green in color that says good first issue. So that's what I mean by a first issue, something that you can start working on. Yeah. So you might want to look out for those ones if you're a starter in open source. Once you identify an issue with that label, you can start contributing to it because it's friendly for you as a beginner. You might not want to go knee deep or neck deep into something that that may not be very comfortable for you. So once you've done something, you've written some code, you've committed it, you might want to ask one of the community members for a review of the code. So sometimes you might push code and it just sits there doing nothing. So you might want you might want to get feedback about the work that you've done. So one of the ways to go about it is to tag somebody on GitHub. You can use the @ symbol and tag one of the core community members, like, please review my code, see what I can do better. It helps you when you're contributing to open source software. So this is the approach that I used in my first experience as an open source contributor. Every time I made a contribution, I would tag my mentor or any of the other project maintainers, like, I've done this change, I described the change that I did, please review it and see what I can do. If I've made any errors, then I'll correct them. It really helps you with starting out as you're starting out with open source. So another important thing, especially if you're writing code, is to test your code. So for some communities, this might not be necessary because already there are automated tests on the GitHub repository. And in one of the projects that I was working in, they had Netlify tests so if you pushed code, it kind of automatically ran the code through a series of tests, and it would not allow you to push that code to GitHub until you corrected those errors. But for some repositories and some communities, they may not have those tests already embedded into the Git system. So you might need to write some tests yourself and make sure they pass those tests so that you don't corrupt the code on the GitHub repository. You don't want to kind of ruin the work that everybody has done and, make their efforts kind of, just please test your code before you push it. Yeah. So I've talked about where to start, how to start, but then if you go to the website, there's no big button there in the middle that says, oh, now start contributing. Sometimes you might have to look for the links to start contributing. Like, usually, if you look at I've taken these examples from the Django page, Microsoft, and then Mix. They have a small button that says get involved, or it may come in the form of support and community. You just have to look for something that's around those words, around the circles: community, get involved, how can you contribute, something like that. So usually if you want to contribute open source, you might want to start there. Now, like for Django, they have this get involved tab that says contribute to Django, submit a bug, report a security issue. And I found this in the footnotes. So you might want to check either in the headers the navigation menu or in the footer. The links are usually embedded there for those who want to contribute to the software. And then if you go to the Microsoft open source page, they also have a get involved button there. Once you click that, it will take you to that page that teaches you, that tells you how you can contribute, where to start contributing from, all that stuff. Then even for Mix has this tab that has support and community. Under that you'll find manuals that teach you that has the documentation for the software. Then they have forums. The forums are like the community platforms like Discord. Other communities use other platforms. And then the GitHub wiki, and then you see there's a get involved there. So once you click that, it will just take you to the page where it will show you how you can start contributing to the Mix, to the open source software. Yeah. So now that you've known how to contribute and how to get started, what is in it for you? In Uganda we say funiramuwa. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Yeah, but how will you benefit? Usually people are like, what will I gain? You know, it might seem like a selfish question, but I mean, you're right to ask it, like, how will you benefit as a contributor? I'm going to show you how you can benefit as a contributor. So once you start contributing, there are so many things that you can get out of this. One of them is exposure. There's a lot of exposure once you start contributing to open source. In my example, once I began contributing to Mix in the outreach program, I got introduced to so many community members. They gave me so many resources. It was actually overwhelming. Like, they were like, oh, since you've done this, you could actually do Google Season of Docs. You can do Google Summer of Code. You can do this. You can do that. Like, it was overwhelming. I didn't even know where to start. So there's a lot of exposure once you start contributing to open source software, because you make so many connections. I'm going to talk about network in the next. There's a white tab there that has network. You network a lot, and people who have an interest in open source usually want other people to also succeed. So there's a lot to benefit once you start contributing. Everybody has your best interests in mind, and they'll introduce you to a lot of opportunities that you can chase, a lot of resources that you can use, and even paid opportunities. So when I talk about network, you will meet so many people. For example, if you begin contributing as a JavaScript developer, you will meet other JavaScript developers who might even be better. Like, you might find like a pro guy and you're like, wow, you look at his code and you're just mind blown, So you get to learn a lot from the network of people that you meet in these open source communities. I think that's a very good. Here in Uganda, when you apply for a job, usually people are like, if you have a connection, you're like set for life. So it's the same thing here. Once you make connections, you have to, it introduces you to a lot of opportunities. So you get to network and make so many friends in the open source community, who in return expose you to a lot of opportunities in turn. It's like a cumulative kind of process. So if you look at some of the job requirements, not just for Uganda or Kampala, if you look at international job requirements, especially in this field of technology, somebody's looking for a JavaScript developer for a certain project. Some of the requirements that they might have is you have to have contributed to open source software before. So usually they're looking for something when they say that. They're looking for somebody who has who knows how to handle community members, who knows how to handle diversity, somebody who knows how to collaborate with other community members. So this is contributing to open source software gives you this advantage. So once you have that on your CV or on your resume, it makes you look good. Like, oh, you've had that experience. If you've contributed to open source software before and your changes have gotten matched, then they can trust you more, because they can trust you more really. Because if you have the ability to contribute to a project as big as one in open source, then you can surely contribute to the one that they are working on. So another benefit that you can get through open source is, money. So I'm going to talk about this in detail in the next slides. So much as open source is mostly voluntary, anybody can contribute, and usually it's people who have passion for that project. But you can also get paid for your passion. And imagine, for me as a beginner, had never even heard of the term open source. I didn't know what open source was. And usually people abbreviated it as FOSS, like force. So I was like, in my head, it was like this fancy term for pro developers. I can't even go there, you know. I was already discouraged. But then you find that I was getting paid for being a beginner in open source. So you can also get paid or incentivized. So some of these incentives can include like health benefits, insurance. You can also, there's a lot of swag available. They can send you like a shirt, caps. For some that may not be a big deal, but for some it's a big deal. People get stickers. And once you're at a cafe and you have like a Major League Hack stick on your laptop, people are like, oh wow, you contributed to Major League Hack, and you're like, yeah, you know. So there are a lot of incentives to working in open source. So for example, in the outreach program, you get paid $6,000. With Google Summer of Docs, it's relative because different organizations now pay different amount of money depending on how the budget that they gave to Google. For some communities, they pay $15,000. For some, they pay $5,000. It could even be more, like it really ranges according to the country that you live in, or the kind of work that you're going to be doing in that project. And then another advantage of contributing is the recognition that you get. So like I said earlier, once you download the source code and start like adding your own features and seeing what you think might benefit the community and the software, that will get recognized eventually, especially if your code is really, really good. So once you push your code to GitHub, it gets merged. They're like, oh, wow, you guys added a functionality. And they'll be like, okay, who is responsible for this? They'll be like, oh, it's Abraham Jerry. Like, oh, Abraham Jerry, he must be a good guy. So there's that recognition that comes with making really good contributions to open source software. So like I had talked about being passionate about the project you're working in. I have put here, be the change that you want to see in the world. So I had talked about this project I'm working on that's called Curious Learning, that helps with early learning and teaching kids how to read and kind of how to also write, but mostly how to read and get acquainted, how to read stories and follow them through. So the major goal here is early learning and development. So for some projects, their goal is to kind of affect climate change, because global warming is a serious issue right now. People are like polluting, factories are polluting, so much is happening. Ice caps are melting. So if you want to see change in the world, it has to start with you. So you don't have to do that through activism, or you can do that through open source. Get a project, start contributing to it. An example is Moja Globe, like I said earlier, and there are so many other communities that have not put on this slide, but just look at what you're passionate about and start contributing. Yeah. So I had said earlier that I would emphasize that I would talk more about these incentivized open source programs. Some of them include Outreach, Google Summer of Code, Major League Hack. There's another one called Girl Script Summer of Code. There are so many. As you can see here, all of these are actually incentivized or paid. For example, Outreach gives you $6,000. For Google Summer of Code, it depends on so many things: the organization that you're working for, the project you're working for, the country that you live in, even your personal hourly rate. It depends on so many, but you still get paid. Major League Hack, they have an open source initiative. They have an open source program whereby they get guys they train you on how to start contributing open source software. I haven't enrolled for it because I had actually applied for another track, but certain changes happened and I didn't go through with it. But don't worry about that. But once you join Major League Hack, you get paid $5,000, and you also get swag, like Major League Hack swag, stickers, shirts, so many things. If you follow some of prominent developers on LinkedIn, like Eddie Yahood, I don't know if that's his name, or Kunal, he's on Twitter as well. These guys, if you look at their laptops, they have so many stickers. They have like GitHub, Google, like Microsoft. They have so many stickers. So that's what they call swag once you start contributing to open source software. So So since most of us might not be very familiar with open source and how to start contributing, I've attached here, I added here a column of, is it starter friendly or not? So Outreach is very starter friendly. I have told you my story. I didn't even know about open source by the time I started looking into Outreach. I had never contributed before. I didn't even know what to do. Like I just went to the site and began there. I began reading about how to contribute, and my role in that aspect. So it's very starter friendly. You can go there even if you haven't had prior experience as a developer or anything like that. So Google Summer of Code, not so much, because you kind of have to be good at what you're doing to as a programmer. You have to be good at your stack or your language to join Google Summer of Code. Major League Hack. For Major League Hack, they have 3 tracks. They have the Explorer track, they have the open source track, and they have I've forgotten the other track. But recently they have this thing that's called the pre-fellowship, because that MLH program is a fellowship in general. But they have this program called the pre-fellowship that kind of teaches people some of the basics in programming before you actually move on to the fellowship. So that could help you. But Major League Hack, the fellowship itself, is not very beginner friendly. You have to, because they're going to ask you about what kind of code you have contributed. They'll ask you to explain your code. They'll ask you to explain your project. So you have to have quite an impressive project to go through. Yeah. So JavaScript Summer of Code is very user friendly. Very starter friendly. You can chase that. Even Google Student of Docs, especially if you're a technical writer. So like I had said earlier, once you get started, you get exposed to so many opportunities. So in my example, once I had finished Outreach, now I had leeway into Google Season of Docs. So in Google Season of Docs, they ask you like technical writing samples that you've done before. And my work with Outreach was in documentation writing. So I was kind of helping to improve the documentation with Mix. So I had samples that I had to attach to my application. So I had like links to the documentation kind of parts that I had authored myself, and the other writing samples that I had done. So I put that on my application, and they were really impressed with what I was doing. Yeah, so I think it's also starter friendly, but as long as you know how to write and you have very good writing samples, even if it hasn't been in open source, you will get in, I believe. So this is not the complete list of opportunities that you can chase. I'm going to attach a link, a resource at the end of this presentation that you can click and kind of look at the complete. Somebody on GitHub kind of curated a complete list of open source opportunities that you can chase. So we're talking about communities here, but there are those communities that are aiming to advocate for open source itself. It's not like a specific community like, oh, this is for this project, this is for this project. There are those communities that are just overall like they're trying to promote the agenda of open source. So one of them is the one that we are in right now, which is Open Source Community Africa. It has very many chapters in Zimbabwe, in Nairobi, in Dar es Salaam. There's so many chapters, and just recently we have one in Kampala. So if you join the open source Discord server, I'm going to attach it at the end of this presentation. You can join that community. You'll find that there are very many channels. Every chapter has a channel. Nairobi has a channel. Abuja has a channel. So you can learn from so many communities from different countries, what you can do, how you can contribute. There are so many resources. Like if you just go through that, it's like reading a manual. Like, oh wow, I can do this as well. I can do this as well. Like you'll be exposed to so much. They have a Discord server. They have Twitter. I think they also have a LinkedIn. I'll attach some of these links at the end of this presentation. Then there's another one called She Code Africa. This is mostly targeted at women because in Africa there's a real issue of underrepresentation in the technology sector. The ratio of females to males in the tech sector is still wanting. So She Code Africa, their objective is to kind of encourage women into the tech sector and encourage them to contribute to software as well. Their main agenda is not really open source per se, but they want to encourage more women into the tech sector. And once you join tech, you can also start looking into open source. So I'm also in She Code Africa. I highly recommend it, especially if you're a lady. But this doesn't mean that guys are not allowed to join. Even guys can join too, but of course the agenda is mostly for women. Yeah. Then there's one called Write the Docs. I put this here because I told you earlier I'm a technical writer, so I found this community very useful. Write the Docs is a platform for writing documentation, and they have a community on Slack that kind of they discuss everything on what tools to use, how to write, technical writing. I find it very insightful. I learned so much from everything that's posted onto their channels there. It's really really nice. Then there's one called O.S.C.A. This mostly is it has a large community of Asian members, but it's similar to Open Source Community Africa. At least we have one in Africa. We have O.S.C.A, and these guys also have O.S.C.A. So it's a win-win. There's one called CNCF. It's right here. Cloud Native Computing Foundation, mostly for cloud native technologies. If you're into that kind of thing, yeah. So these are the resources that I have attached here. I've put here I had talked about this table here on the program that you can chase, but the full list can be found on this GitHub repository by Tapasweni Pathak. If you follow this link, somebody took the time to actually curate a whole list of all the opportunities you can chase. She even goes ahead to categorize them into paid and not paid, incentivized or not. Like it's very detailed. I think you should check it out. I had talked about the MLH open source program. I have put a link there, one for outreach. There's an article on how to make money from open source. I think you might want to check that out as well. Google Summer of Code. I don't know if they are currently accepting applications, but they usually have like seasons, like it's because it's called summer. I think you contribute in the summer. I'm not sure. I'm in Uganda because we don't have summer here, so I'm not really sure. But yeah, they accept applications for a period, and they start vetting people, and then they start selecting people to contribute to these projects. Then I have also attached, when I was contributing to the Mix software, we were required to blog about our experience. So I have a blog on WordPress. I did weekly updates. I talked about everything that I did in open source, like to the nitty-gritty, the challenges that I faced. In Uganda, we had a problem whereby there was elections and the internet was cut off. Where there was a nationwide blackout. And for us developers, we had a major issue with, okay, now what do? We can't access GitHub. We can't access a lot of the developer tools which are hosted on the internet. We were going through so much as Ugandan developers. So I also talked about that. I also talked about my experience as a first-time contributor to that project. So I think it's quite resourceful. I also put in kind of paragraphs of advice, what you can do, what you can learn from my experience and stuff like that. So if you need to, I know I've talked about a lot of things, but some of you may have questions, and you may not be able to cover all of them in this segment, but I've attached here the various channels through which you can reach me. We have a Discord server for Kampala. I have attached the link here. You can follow it and kind of meet other community members here in Kampala. You can also meet other community members from Nairobi, from all the other O.S.C.A community chapters. You can also reach me on Twitter. I'm very active there. I have a website, though it's not very complete. Please don't criticize me harshly. But that's a link to my website. I have a LinkedIn. My WordPress blog here is anudebra.readme. I should have put this as my blog and not website. And this is my primary email. So I have my channels on 24/7. So if you reach me, I can guarantee that you'll get a reply within 24 hours. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for allowing me to rant about open source and kind of expose you to the various opportunities. I know I tend to talk a lot sometimes, but I hope you have been able to benefit from this presentation. And my only goal is to see more Ugandans involved in open source. In my experience, I've not met very many Ugandans in open source, and it was kind of disappointing for me because it's always nice to have a homebody there, like, oh, we're from the same hometown or something like that. So it would be nice to see all of you kind of join open source and join the movement, or even just support it at least. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. Thank you. I think I'll hand this back to Jerry. Jerry, I think you can take it from here. So I think we might have questions, as Jerry might Jerry, are you still
Yes.
there? Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you, Deborah.
Okay.
Thank you, Debbie. Anyone, we are going to any questions for Debbie before we can move on to the next list. Anyone has a question, you can type it within the chat and then we'll answer. Yeah, so Jordan is saying, don't get only motivated by money. Let's have passion in contributing and learning. And I saw among the questions, let me see. Do Medium articles also count? Daniel was asking within the chat. I
Oh,
think Debbie can answer that.
um, yes, actually, essentially, writing experience is primary. Whatever channel that you use is not really important. Whether you write on Google Docs, or you have a blog on Dev or Medium, as long as you have been writing and you have something to show for it, you can kind of show that as your writing experience. So if you have something to show for your writing experience, I think that is what is important. Well, if you have a Medium blog, that's great. That's amazing. That will work. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. So also from my experience, I would say the Medium articles do work. I work with a company in New York. It's called Sector Software. And when they saw my Medium article, they were quite impressed. So I'm going to share if there are no more questions. Let me first share my screen so that you can have a look at how the Discord channel looks like. So those who are not familiar with how these communities work, we have a Discord channel, and this is how it will look like when you sign in. We have, there are different chapters, so a lot. Okay, I'm a chapter lead, so I'm within this chapter. But then there is a community for Nigerians. There is a community for as you can see, Nigeria has very many cities which are active. I think we should get on board also. But on my opinion, I would say you guys should all join this community on the Discord channel and learn about what benefits are there.
The various opportunities that you
I
can
see,
get.
yeah, I see in the chat we have how is the software helping in this pandemic? How is the software helping in this pandemic?
Which software?
That's by, yeah, I would like to ask also that which software, Rachel?
How is the
Okay,
software helping
but
in this
that
pandemic?
aside, in this pandemic. But that
Oh,
aside, I think we'll need more clarity on that.
I think what she
Yeah.
means is how is open source software helping in this pandemic? Actually, if you there, how do I explain this? With the pandemic, it has come so many problems. People have lost their jobs. People can't go to office anymore. People's salaries have been cut in half because they are doing half the work that they used to do before. So if you're in a country like ours, Uganda, like we have so many problems. They cut your salary in half. They fire you because they can't afford you anymore. The economy is slowing down because we are forced to be at home and to work from home. So if you're in the business, I wouldn't say it's a business, but if you're in the business of open source, things like the pandemic do not limit you, because whether there's a pandemic or whether there's not a pandemic, open source has to go on. And if you're lucky enough to be in a paid opportunity like Google Season of Docs or Summer of Code, you'll still get paid. Your salary your payment will not be cut in half just because the economy has been affected. No. Like, things still remain constant because everything is primarily on the web and you work remotely. But in a situation whereby you work physically and you have to go to office every day, the pandemic might actually affect you. I think that's what she was asking about. I hope I answered her question.
Thank you, Debbie. And also, we have another question. Does this program only apply to the IT-oriented people? and it cuts across. So I'd like to answer that one. I would say, as you can see, we have very many groups. It cuts across. There are those who can do design, there are those who can do documentation, data science, a lot. As you have heard, Deborah works with documentation. In case you have an engineering background, you can also contribute. There is a lot. We don't only have groups that are IT oriented. We need a lot of other people. There are some who are interested in designers. There are people who are really good in design. Some who are good at social media. You can also take part. And I've shared the link to the Discord channel. Let me share it again. And at this point, I want to bring on like one person. He's called Sudi to tell us about one other community of open source that is Sudi on the call before we end this launch. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jerry. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, Sudi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Debbie. The presentation was so nice. I wasn't that much interested in open source software, but now I think I'm going to put some effort. So we also have an open community, open source community that works on different projects, and for now we are planning to start a project. If I can share a project that we are going to do. There is actually someone in a chat who asked if there is an open source project that can be done in Uganda. So we are planning to do a project on fighting hunger through machine learning based crop classification. So this is an open source project. Anyone in Uganda can participate. And basically we will use machine learning and see what we can do about fighting hunger in Uganda. We will use images, satellite images, and different types of images that we could get from various types of sources. So there is actually different goals that if you participate in this project, you can gain. You can learn machine learning, as I said, data science, how to do data collection, how to pre-process the data, how to build your own data set, then develop a model itself, train it, then test it. So the results from these projects will be open to everyone, to the government, to the community who wants to use this type of the results. We usually do these kinds of projects, so anyone who want to join can actually share the link in the chat. Then you guys can join if you want. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm really thankful. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you, Sudi, for that. And I would like to say we will be hosting these events once every month. So keep looking out for this, especially in case you want to contribute and want to learn more and grow with us. We are hoping to grow into other chapters in Jinja, in the rest of the cities. As we can see, there is Innovation Village Lead for Jinja City with us, Mr. Mohammed, and we will be hopefully growing and having more people benefit from this community. There is a lot to learn. I would also like to see more people. We are tired of seeing only Indians taking up. We are taking up all the jobs. Okay, but Indians have an advantage because of that, our gap, time difference with America. But I would like to say, we would like to have more Ugandans who can contribute and they join the community and learn more about what is available. Thank you very much.
So as there
And
are no more questions in the channel, and if you guys have any more questions, you can ask on any of our community platforms where we shall always answer. So you don't feel pressurized to ask any questions now. If a question hits you, you can always ask in the platforms, in the community platforms. We look forward to seeing you guys in the Discord server, on WhatsApp, on Twitter. Interact, tweet about hashtag Open Source Community Africa. You can join our LinkedIn page. Just kind of get the word out there about the Kampala chapter of open source. So we would love to see your contribution to the community and also your contribution to open source software. Yeah.
thank you, everyone. And I want to thank you all for joining on this call. It has been great seeing everyone. Maybe you can join for a small group photo. If everyone can turn on their cameras, just do a small.
People are camera shy.
Yeah, so just
It's so nice to meet all of you in your comfort zones. I'm also taking one myself, so
it's good to see everyone. Yeah, it's good to see everyone. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining. And we hope to see more people join in the future. So in case you want to take part, just join us within the WhatsApp channel. We will always be available within the Discord channel. We will always be ready to respond.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys. Bye.
Looking forward to more contributors in Uganda.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Debbie.
Yeah, and look
and
forward
Abraham
to
and
this.
Sudi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right. So the meeting is officially ended. You guys can go home.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.